Amy Marks Coors, Chris Ranji on KMOX. Good morning to you. Title 42 expires tomorrow. Just a few minutes ago, Department of Homeland Security Secretary Mayorkas delivering in a press conference the edict to people, don't come here. He basically was telling immigrants not to cross the border after the expiration of Title 42. And to talk more about what's going to happen when this does expire tomorrow is Kate Lincoln-Goldfinch, who is the owner and CEO of Lincoln-Goldfinch Law. And Kate joins us this morning on KMOX. We appreciate you being with us, Kate. How are you?
Hi, I'm good this morning. Thanks for having me on.
So I don't know if you got an opportunity to hear the Department of Homeland Security Secretary and his comments about tomorrow. If you did, or if you heard the message that he's delivering, telling people not to risk their lives, which is what he said, to try and cross the border and come to the United States. What are your thoughts on that?
You know, this is a natural consequence of what we've had over the last 3 years, which is a closure of the border to asylum seekers because of Title 42 under the public health emergency of COVID that is lifting tomorrow. So the impact of that is that for 3 years, people who normally would have been able to come to the border and be screened for asylum, like people from Venezuela or Cuba or Honduras who are fleeing, violence in their countries, have been, many of them just stuck in Mexico, some of them living in, makeshift refugee camps, just waiting for the opportunity to be able to apply for asylum. So the reality on the ground is that we have a backlog of asylum seekers that now our country will need to deal with. And so it doesn't surprise me at all that the government is sending the message telling people to not come. But when you're talking about desperate migrants who have been waiting, many of them up to 3 years for their chance, a press conference is probably not going to do the job.
Yeah, I just feel like the U.S. government over multiple administrations, not just this one, the last one, the one before that, has failed in creating an immigration policy. And the result of that is a humanitarian crisis. We focus on one city alone. Let's focus on El Paso, Texas, that could see tomorrow, with the lifting of Title 42, upwards of 15,000 migrants a day. How in the world does any infrastructure, any city absorb that number of people?
Sure. And, I would put this back on the federal government, the responsibility for this. It shouldn't fall to the city of El Paso to manage this, right? The reality is most asylum seekers, and I say this, I've been an immigration lawyer in Texas for 15 years. I've worked with thousands of asylum seekers. Almost all of them have somewhere they're intending to go. They have family or relatives in the United States, and they're planning to get to California or New York or somewhere to go and prepare for their asylum hearings. And so their stay, along the border is temporary, and they need shelter, food, just sort of to get on their way. My expectation would have been that the Biden administration would have planned ahead for the needs, just the basic human needs of the population, as opposed to sending down like law enforcement. What they need is food, water, shelter, processing, and then they go on their way. We'll see, how this is handled. I don't have high expectations that it will be managed well, just based on how things have gone in the past. And then there's this whole next step where the Biden administration is attempting to limit asylum, and that's going to be challenged in court. And does it bolster the Biden administration's position in court to restrict asylum if things go badly this week? It's such a mess. But I really tie this all back, not to our presidential failures to manage this stuff, but to Congress's failure to act on immigration reform for the last 4 decades.
Correct me if I'm wrong on this, because I'm not an expert in this subject. You, as an immigration attorney, would know way more about it than I would. But it seems to me that because the immigration system is broken, that people, instead of because you always hear the average person say, go through the proper channels, you go through it, you do it the right way and become a citizen, or, you make it to the United States, and that's okay. But it's when you're crossing the border illegally, that's when I have a problem with you. Does it not make it more likely that people will seek more illegal ways to cross the border if there isn't a good system for them to filter in? And that's why there's more chaos, or is that the wrong way to look at it?
Oh, that's definitely a factor. I mean, the reality is that what these migrants go through, I mean, these people down here who have been living in these tent camps along the border, they're lining up at the checkpoints to try and get in. You know, they're living as just in horrible conditions. And most people would not put themselves through that unless something, you know, truly dangerous were chasing them into this situation. Also, there is a reality that this country has a need for immigrant labor that is it's looming, and it's getting larger as our baby boomer population is aging. And, you know, for the first time next year, we're having more people in this country who are over the age of 65 than under the age of 15 for the first time ever in the United States. We have a problem in this country of an aging population. And the solution to that is immigration reform. We have all of these jobs that we need immigrants to do. So there is an aspect of, if Congress could pass immigration reform that reflected the needs of our economy, that gave, you know, workers, not asylum seekers, but immigrants who want to come and work, a way to do that, of course it would calm the chaos at the border. And we are always going to have people from around the globe who are fleeing persecution somewhere, from Russia, you know, from Venezuela, from somewhere in Africa. I mean, just it's always going to be happening. So we also need to maintain the system that we've had in place for decades, where we have a mechanism for screening asylum seekers, and we can provide protection to the people who qualify.
There have been many migrants who have crossed the border illegally. Some have been apprehended. Some have faced expulsion. Some have been able to, for whatever reason, stay. There are also many immigrants who have gone through the process legally. How do you balance wanting to help those who are fleeing their countries, fleeing tough circumstances to get to the United States, granting them some clemency, while there are others who are going through a very long and tedious process who might feel like, wait a minute, I'm going the long, difficult way to stay in this country?
Yeah, I think that sort of relates to this idea that people espouse, which is like this idea of getting in line. And I think that just reflects sort of a lack of knowledge of the system, because asylum requires that someone be at the border to apply or in the country. That's a requisite, you know, rule of asylum. And the actual statute says it doesn't matter how they got here, but they have to be here to apply for asylum. So when we do something like Title 42 and we say nobody can apply for asylum, they cannot go to the bridge and ask for help. We don't care what they're fleeing, what has happened to them. If it's someone who, you know, female genital mutilation, you know, very obvious asylum qualifying case, even people like that are turned away because they're just not processing asylum seekers. So that leaves people with the only choice, if they're truly in this desperate, dangerous situation, to attempt to cross, at which point they may be processed for asylum. So the laws, the policies that we put in place encourage this behavior for desperate people who are running from something. So that's why Title 42 is bad and shouldn't have been in place for 3 years, and why we need to all push our leadership to process asylum seekers, to provide a way for asylum seekers to just present at the border and say, hey, I'm afraid of returning to my country. Will you screen me? Because if we can do that, then people won't go through these, you know, desperate, dangerous measures to get in this country.
Yesterday, the outgoing mayor of Chicago held a press conference and was talking about the immigrants that have been bused up to Chicago from, I believe it was Florida and maybe some from Texas as well. And a lot of those immigrants are sleeping in police stations around the city. There isn't enough capacity in that northern city. And I can understand on some level being at the border, the southern border, and feeling overwhelmed by the influx of people. But I wonder how much these stunts of busing these immigrants all the way up to northern states really helps the situation. I mean, there's got to be a balance in there in the middle somewhere, isn't there?
Oh, yes. I mean, I think all of these political stunts, the main thing that these are achieving is attention and votes for people like Greg Abbott and DeSantis. That's what they're doing with stunts like that. But in terms of our cities in this moment, like El Paso, being overwhelmed by migrants, yeah, maybe. But the thing to keep in mind is that we are dealing with a backlog of 3 years of asylum applicants because we closed down the border. The culprit of this is not the migrants. It's not, any particular politician. It's this policy that's been in place for 3 years that has to go away. It doesn't make any sense to keep it in place. And so we have to just, have a reckoning with this backlog of people, and then we'll settle back into a routine. This is not an emergency that's going to go on forever. And I think people need to not panic when they see pictures of, groups of migrants, or they hear even, conservative politicians talking about this, because this is a temporary situation. And also, this is the United States of America, and we can navigate this. We can figure this out. And we have a need for immigrants, bottom line.
Kate Lincoln-Goldfinch is an immigration attorney out of Texas, owner and CEO of Lincoln-Goldfinch Law. We appreciate your time. Thank you for visiting with us today, Kate.
Anytime. Thanks for having me on.